There are stories that live on the internet, passed around in late-night chats and shadowed forums. They feel real because they tap into a shared primal fear. The story of the Mirror Man is one of them. It begins with a simple, chilling question. Have you seen the man who only appears in mirrors? For Alex, a man who believed only in data, this question was a key to his sister's suicide. He thought he was searching for a psychological trigger, a digital delusion. He was wrong. He was looking at an invitation. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. Grief has a texture. For Alex, it was the rough cardboard of the boxes piled in his living room, each one a sealed sarcophagus of his sister's life. Chloe was gone. The official report was a clean, sterile document that used the word suicide like a surgical tool, excising all the messy, unanswered questions. Alex couldn't accept it. Chloe had been sad, yes, increasingly withdrawn, but she wasn't a person of tidy conclusions. She was a whirlwind of charcoal sketches, half-finished poems, and a chaotic Spotify playlist that jumped from Debussy to death metal. He sat on the floor of his own minimalist apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the life contained in the boxes. He felt a familiar, knowing guilt. He was the older brother, the pragmatic one, the data analyst who saw the world in patterns and predictable outcomes. He should have seen the pattern in her. He should have seen the deviation from the norm. Seeking logic where there was none, he opened the box labeled electronics. Inside was her laptop. It felt cold, inert. He booted it up, a password prompt glowing on the screen. He tried her birthday, her cat's name, then sighed and typed in stargazer_23. A flicker, and then her desktop appeared. A swirling purple nebula she'd painted herself. An ache tightened his chest. He started where any data analyst would, the browser history. He expected to find art blogs, music forums, maybe evidence of a failed romance. What he found was an obsession. The search history for the last 3 months was a spiraling vortex around the single, unnerving theme. Man in mirror myth. Reflection not moving with me. Have you seen the man with no reflection? The Mirror Man challenge. How to stop seeing him. The entries grew more frantic over time, logged at 3, 4, 5 in the morning. Alex's blood ran cold. He clicked on a link to a fringe paranormal forum, a site with a black background and stark white text called The Static Veil. He found Chloe's profile, Moonchild Art, and he found her posts. Posted by Moonchild Art, 3 months ago. Hey everyone, has anyone else heard of this? The man who only appears in mirrors? My friend sent me a link to a story about him, and now I can't stop thinking about it. Probably just a creepypasta, but it's super unsettling. A few weeks later, another post. Posted by Moonchild Art, 2 months ago. Okay, this isn't funny anymore. I think I saw him, just for a second, in the bathroom mirror. He was just standing there, behind me, tall, wearing a suit or something. I turned around and nothing was there. I think I'm just freaking myself out. And then the last one, dated just a week before her death, posted by Moonchild Art, a week ago. He's always there now, every time. In the window of the bus, in my phone screen when it's off. He doesn't do anything. He just watches me. I can feel his eyes even when I'm not looking. I can't sleep. I've covered all the mirrors in my apartment, but it doesn't matter. I see him in a spoon, in a puddle. Does anyone know how to make it stop? Please, I'm so scared. He's so patient. He's waiting for something. Alex slammed the laptop shut. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a sudden, devastating clarity. It wasn't a ghost, it wasn't a curse. It was a disease of the mind. Chloe, his sensitive, artistic sister, had been consumed by a shared delusion, a viral psychosis born on the internet. He saw the pattern now, an online urban legend acting as a catalyst for a psychotic break, maybe latent schizophrenia triggered by the power of suggestion. A fresh wave of guilt, sharper and more acidic than any before, washed over him. He hadn't just missed the signs, he had been living in a different reality from her. While he was debugging code and optimizing databases, she was fighting a phantom in her own reflection. He saw her death not as a supernatural event, but a catastrophic failure of mental health care, of family, of his own damn awareness. He had to understand how this happened, to map the contagion, for Chloe, for the cold, hard data of it. He opened the laptop again, the hum of the fan sounding like a low, mournful sigh. The next 2 days were a blur of digital archaeology. Alex fell deep into the rabbit hole that had consumed Chloe, his analyst's mind meticulously compiling data points. He created a spreadsheet, dates of Chloe's posts, cross-referenced with keywords, IP addresses from the forums, and every variation of the legend he could find. He read stories from a dozen different users on the Static Veil and other more obscure sites. The accounts were eerily similar. It always started with the question. It grew with obsession. It manifested in brief, peripheral glimpses. The Mirror Man was a specter built of consensus. Tall, gaunt, simple suit. His face was the only inconsistency. Some said it was blank, others said it was blurry, and a few claimed it was the viewer's own face, but older, worn down. The one constant was his demeanor, unnervingly calm, patient, and observant. He never spoke, he never moved, he just appeared. Classic mass hysteria, Alex muttered to himself, the words a mantra to keep the irrationality at bay. He was staring at his monitor, a complex web of forum threads mapped out on the screen. He was tired, his eyes gritty from lack of sleep. As he leaned back, the monitor went into sleep mode. The screen turned black. For a fraction of a second, in the dark, reflective surface, he saw it. His own exhausted face stared back, and behind him, standing in the middle of his living room, was a tall, dark shape, a man. Alex's body went rigid. He whipped his head around, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. Nothing. Just his couch, the boxes, the quiet emptiness of his apartment. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. He breathed deeply, running a hand over his face. Power of suggestion, he whispered, the sound loud in the silent room. You've been reading about it for 48 hours straight. Your brain is just projecting the image. It was a logical, textbook explanation. It was the only explanation he would allow. He shook his head, flicked the mouse to wake the screen, and forced himself to get back to work, ignoring the new, prickling sensation on the back of his neck. Later that night, exhaustion had finally won. He was a zombie, moving through the motions of his nightly routine. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing his teeth, his gaze unfocused. He spat into the sink, rinsed his mouth, and then, out of habit, he looked up. And he saw him. It wasn't a flicker. It wasn't a trick of the light. For 2 full, heart-stopping seconds, he was there. In the mirror, standing just behind Alex's right shoulder, was a man. Tall and impossibly thin, his body draped in a plain, dark suit that looked subtly out of fashion. His face was pale, indistinct, but his form was absolute. He wasn't doing anything threatening. He was simply standing there, observing Alex's reflection with a profound and terrifying stillness. A primal scream caught in Alex's throat. He spun around, his back slamming against the cold tile of the shower wall. The bathroom was small, empty, and brightly lit. There was nowhere to hide. No one was there. His breath came in ragged, panicked gasps. He slowly, hesitantly turned back to the mirror. Only his own wide, terrified eyes stared back, his face stark white under the vanity lights. The man was gone. But the image was burned into his retina, a perfect, vivid afterimage. This wasn't suggestion. This wasn't a tired mind playing tricks. It was too real, too solid. He was now faced with a horrifying choice, a fork in the road of his own sanity. Path 1, he was having a psychotic break, the same kind he had diagnosed his sister with, triggered by the same story. Path 2, the impossible was real, and a story on the internet had invited something into his home. Both possibilities were equally terrifying. He stared at his reflection, but he was no longer looking at himself. He was looking for the man who was supposed to be there. The world became a gauntlet of reflective surfaces. What had begun as a clear, undeniable sighting in his bathroom mirror now devolved into a series of maddening, fleeting glimpses. A flash of a tall figure in a dark suit in the side mirror of his car as he changed lanes, causing him to swerve. The silhouette of a man standing behind his reflection in a darkened storefront window as he walked home from the office, making him stop and stare at his own ghostly image until a passerby gave him a strange look. The worst was his phone. He'd pull it out to check a message, and for a split second, in the black screen, he'd see the man's passive face over his shoulder. The sightings were always brief, always silent, and always in his periphery. The mirror man was a phantom of the corner of his eye, a ghost that lived in polished chrome and panes of glass. Alex's anxiety skyrocketed. He started avoiding eye contact with his own reflection, a difficult task in a modern world. He felt a constant, low-grade hum of paranoia, the sense of being watched that Chloe had described in her final post. Sleep offered little respite. He'd dream of houses made of mirrors, with the gaunt man waiting in every room. He abandoned his spreadsheet and returned to the forums, this time as a desperate seeker, not a skeptical analyst. He devoured every post, every comment, piecing together the unspoken mechanics of the phenomenon. He began to see the pattern he'd been looking for, but it wasn't psychological, it was procedural. The rules. Rule number 1. The question was the key. Have you seen the man who only appears in mirrors? It acted as a mimetic trigger, an idea that, once planted, began to replicate in the host's mind. It was an invitation. Rule number 2. The entity was drawn to specific emotional states: isolation, grief, obsession. It was a predator that hunted the psychologically vulnerable. Alex, grieving and increasingly isolated in his obsessive research, was a perfect target. Rule number 3. Looking for him was a confirmation. Every time Alex checked a reflection expecting to see him, he was strengthening the connection. He was feeding the entity with his attention. Desperate and feeling his grip on reality slide, Alex tried to talk to his best friend Mark. They met for a beer, and Alex, trying to sound casual, broached the subject. "Hey, have you ever heard of this weird internet thing, the Mirror Man?" Mark just laughed. "Sounds like another Slender Man knockoff. Why?" "Chloe, she was obsessed with it before she died," Alex said. "And I think I'm starting to see things. The same things she described." The humor vanished from Mark's face, replaced by a deep, worried concern. "Alex, man, you've been through hell. Your sister, that's a massive trauma. It's totally normal for your mind to be playing tricks on you. Grief can cause hallucinations. You should really talk to someone, a professional." It was the exact same rational, compassionate response Alex had felt towards Chloe, and it felt like a door slamming in his face. If he went to a therapist, they would put him on medication, maybe even suggest hospitalization. They would treat the symptom, him, and never believe the cause. Fearing the diagnosis that would invalidate his entire terrifying experience, he took a different path. He searched for experts, not in mental health, but in the phenomena themselves. He found Dr. Lena Hansen, a folklorist at the local university whose work focused on the evolution of modern legends and mass hysterias. He drafted a careful, academic-sounding email, framing his inquiry as research for a paper, a case study based on the digital folklore that had affected his late sister. He omitted one crucial detail, that he was no longer just the researcher. He was now the case study. Dr. Lena Hansen's office was an organized chaos of books, a fortress built of paper and academic thought. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to analyze Alex the moment he sat down. She listened intently as he laid out his research, speaking about his sister's case in the detached, third-person tone he had practiced. "The Mirror Man," she said, leaning back in her chair and steepling her fingers. "Yes, I've come across it. It's a fascinating example of a modern mimetic bogeyman. It has all the classic hallmarks, a simple, repeatable vector of transmission, the question, and a manifestation that preys on common fears." Alex felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't dismissing it. "You're looking for a rational explanation," she continued, "and there are several compelling ones. The most obvious is a simple mass hysteria, amplified by the echo chamber of the internet. But there are more esoteric theories." She pulled a heavy book from a nearby shelf. "Have you ever heard of a tulpa?" Alex shook his head. "It's a concept from Tibetan mysticism, a thought form. The idea is that an entity can be manifested into existence through sheer collective belief and focused concentration. A group of people thinking about, describing, and believing in the same being can, theoretically, give it a kind of objective psychic presence, an echo that starts to make its own noise." She then slid into another concept. "Or think of it as a mimetic virus, an idea that spreads from mind to mind. Most memes are harmless, a funny image, a catchphrase. But what if a meme could carry a payload? What if the idea of the Mirror Man isn't just a story, but a piece of code for the human mind? The question loads the program, and your fear and obsession run it. It creates a hallucination so specific and so powerful that it feels real." Dr. Hansen remained scientifically grounded, peppering her speech with words like theoretically and paradigm. She wasn't a believer, but she was intrigued by the pattern, the consistency of the data from online accounts. "The passivity of the entity is what I find most compelling," she mused. "It suggests it's not an aggressive spirit, but something that exists only to be observed. It feeds on sight." As Alex left her office, the world seemed darker. Dr. Hansen's theories gave his fear a name and a shape, making it more real, not less. The sightings began to change. The Mirror Man seemed to be testing the boundaries. He'd appear closer in the reflection now, so close Alex could almost make out the weave of his suit. Sometimes his head would be tilted at a new, inquisitive angle, as if he were studying a particularly interesting specimen. And then came the physical manifestations. After a particularly vivid sighting in his car's rearview mirror, the radio sputtered and died, only to come back to life a minute later. One evening, after seeing the man's reflection in the dark glass of his oven door, a sudden, inexplicable chill dropped the temperature in his kitchen by 10 degrees. He started noticing a faint, dry smell after a sighting, like old paper or dust from a long-sealed room. All of it was deniable, a fuse, a draft, his imagination. But the pattern was there. The data was undeniable. This was more than hallucination. The echo was getting louder. Driven by a new kind of dread, Alex dove back into Chloe's laptop, convinced he had missed something. He ran a file recovery program, searching for deleted items, hidden partitions, anything. After hours of scanning, it found one thing: a heavily encrypted file in a hidden directory named simply journal.docs. His heart hammered. He spent the next 6 hours running decryption software, trying every password he could think of. Finally, on a whim, he typed in the phrase he'd seen her post in terror. He just watches. The file unlocked. It was her journal from her final 3 weeks. Reading it was like watching a recording of a soul's decay. The entries, written in frantic, stream of consciousness prose, documented a terrifying escalation. Day 1. He was in the mirror again when I woke up. He doesn't leave anymore. He's just there, waiting. I don't know what he wants. I tried yelling at my reflection. He didn't even flinch. Day 4. Something new happened today. I was washing my face, and when I looked up, it wasn't me in the mirror. It was him. Just for a second. His face, where mine should have been. It was blank, smooth like an eggshell. I screamed and fell back, and when I looked again, it was just me, crying. Day 9. I don't think my thoughts are my own anymore. It's like there's a quiet hum in the back of my mind, a second track playing alongside my own. A thought that isn't mine will pop into my head. Turn around. Look in the glass. I feel like a puppet, and he's holding the strings. Day 15. I tried a banishing ritual I found online. Salt and sage and chanting. It was stupid. It didn't work. I think it made him angry. Or maybe not angry. Stronger. He feels more real now. More solid. The air gets cold when he's close. I can smell him. Dust and decay. Chloe's research had gone deeper than his. She had chased the legend to its supposed origin. In the journal, she described a fragmented, unverifiable story she'd pieced together from decades-old local news archives. A story about a reclusive man named Arthur Hayes who lived and died alone in a city apartment in the 1970s. He was so obscure that no one noticed he was dead for weeks. The discovery was only made when children playing in the street claimed they could still see a man watching them from his apartment window, even though the police had already removed the body. It became a local ghost story, a footnote in the city's lore that eventually mutated and found new life online as the legend of the Mirror Man. Reading the words, Alex felt a suffocating sense of déjà vu. The cold spots, the feeling of being watched, the progression from passive observation to something more invasive. He wasn't just investigating Chloe's path. He was walking it step for painstaking step. His skepticism had eroded into belief. His observation had become obsession. His anxiety was hardening into a constant, grinding paranoia. The Mirror Man was no longer an occasional intruder. He was a permanent resident in the corner of Alex's vision, a silent, gaunt companion in every reflective surface. His patient gaze a constant, crushing weight. Alex finally understood. Chloe hadn't killed herself to escape the man in the mirror. She had been erased by him. The membrane between worlds, between reality and reflection, was growing thin and porous. The horror was no longer confined to sightings. It was beginning to interact. One night, Alex stood frozen in his hallway, staring at the long mirror on his closet door. The mirror man was there, standing directly behind his reflection. As Alex watched, paralyzed, the man's reflected hand slowly lifted and reached out, his long, pale fingers wrapping around the reflection of the brass doorknob. In the dead silence of the apartment, Alex heard it. Click, rattle, rattle. The real doorknob, a dozen feet away from him, turned slightly and shook in its fitting. A strangled gasp escaped Alex's lips. He scrambled backwards, his eyes wide with terror. The barrier was breaking. The phantom was touching the real world. The entity's behavior grew more deliberate. It seemed to be trying to communicate, not with words, but with a horrifying pantomime. While Alex was frantically searching for information online, he saw the man's reflection in his dark monitor. The figure subtly, almost imperceptibly nodded towards the box of Chloe's belongings in the corner. When Alex ignored it, the man appeared moments later in the reflection of a framed picture on the wall, his gaze fixed on the same box. It wanted something. It was guiding his attention, and Alex was terrified to find out why. The most profound shift was in the man's non-existent expression. His features were still a blur, but their intent was becoming clear. During a moment of sheer heart-pounding panic, when Alex thought he heard footsteps in the hall, he glanced at the bathroom mirror and saw the man's reflection carrying a look of what could only be described as cool, clinical curiosity. When Alex slumped to the floor in a fit of hopeless despair, convinced he was losing his mind, a glimpse in the black glass of the TV screen showed the figure's posture shifting into something that felt like satisfaction. It was feeding on his fear. It was thriving on his despair. This wasn't a passive echo anymore. It was an active predator, and its hunting ground was his sanity. The line between Alex and Chloe was gone. He was no longer following in her footsteps. He was wearing her shoes, and the path was crumbling away into the same abyss. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that soon it would not be his face he saw in the mirror. It will be a blank, pale oval, waiting to claim his reflection for its own. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Alex was microwaving a sad, flavorless dinner and caught a glimpse of the mirror man in the reflective glass of the appliance. The man was closer than ever, his face almost pressing against the back of Alex's reflected head. In that moment, Alex felt a thought slided to his own mind, a cold and foreign whisper. It's so much quieter in here. He cried out and stumbled back, the spell broken. That was it. He was at the edge of the cliff where Chloe had stood. He could let it push him, or he could turn and fight. The entity's power wasn't in its strength, but in his attention. It was a psychic parasite, and he had to starve it. He remembered Dr. Hansen's words about a psychological kill switch. He would sever the connection. He would perform a ritual not of banishment, but of unseeing. The battle began. He moved with a feverish energy he hadn't felt in months. First, the mirrors. He took the heavy one from the hallway and the one from the bathroom, and with a grunt, hauled them down to the building's dumpster. He taped thick black garbage bags over his windows, plunging the apartment into a tomb-like darkness. His TV, his microwave, his laptop screen, all were draped in towels and blankets. But it wasn't enough to blind the entity. He had to blind himself to its influence. He put on his headphones and blasted the loudest, most aggressive punk rock he could find, a wall of chaotic sound to drown out the phantom whispers. He made coffee, not to drink, but to smell, the rich, bitter aroma, a powerful anchor to the tangible world. He paced his apartment, running his hands along the rough texture of the plaster walls, the cool metal of the refrigerator, focusing on every sensation that was real and non-reflective. He began to speak, his voice raw and loud over the music. "You are a story," he shouted into the darkness. "You are an echo in a sad, empty room. You are a pattern in the static. I am not looking. I am not listening. You have no power here." As he fought, the Mirror Man made its final, desperate bid for his attention. The feeling of being watched intensified into a suffocating pressure, as if the air itself had become thick and heavy. A floorboard creaked in the hall. A phantom knock echoed from the front door. Shadows and the slivers of light under the door seemed to writhe and twist. He squeezed his eyes shut, focusing on the music, the smell of coffee, the mantra he kept repeating. Then came the final test. He stumbled in the dark and knocked a metal spoon off the counter. It landed on the floor with a clatter. As he bent to pick it up, his muscle memory, his curse, made him glance at its polished, convex surface. For a horrifying instant, he saw the man. He was no longer passive. The blurred features of his face were contorted in a silent, desperate scream. His hands were pressed against the inner surface of the spoon's reflection, clawing, reaching out. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. A lure of pity and terror designed to make Alex look, to make him acknowledge it, to reestablish the psychic link. For a split second, Alex froze. The image was terrifying, compelling. But then he remembered Chloe's journal, the way the entity grew stronger with every ounce of emotion she fed it. With a surge of will, he closed his fist around the spoon, shattering the reflection. "No," he snarled. "I'm not looking." He threw the spoon across the room, turned his back, and cranked the volume on his headphones until his ears ached. He would not give it the satisfaction of his fear. He would stare into the darkness of his own making until the sun came up. Dawn arrived not as a light, but as a feeling, a slow, gradual release of pressure. After a long, harrowing night spent in a self-imposed sensory deprivation chamber, the overwhelming feeling of being watched was gone. The air in his apartment felt lighter, cleaner. Exhausted but resolute, Alex slowly began to peel the bags from his windows, letting the pale morning light spill in. The world looked blessedly, beautifully normal. For weeks, he lived in a world of matte finishes, avoiding his own reflection, taking down pictures, even eating off paper plates. He was healing. He emailed Dr. Hansen, telling her simply that the experiment was over and that he believed he had broken the feedback loop. He never told her the full truth. Instead, he channeled his terror into a new purpose. He created an anonymous blog, a digital lighthouse for others lost in the same storm. He shared his story as a cautionary tale, stripped of supernatural claims and framed as a warning about mimetic dangers, obsession, and the importance of recognizing the signs of psychological distress. He was a data analyst again, but now he analyzed the patterns of fear, hoping to save someone else from the phantom he'd faced. Months passed. Life settled into a new, more cautious rhythm. One Saturday, Alex was helping his friend Mark move into a new apartment. "Hey, can you grab that end?" Mark asked, gesturing to a large, heavy, framed painting. Alex nodded, gripping the ornate wooden frame. As he lifted it, he angled the piece, and for one heart-stopping moment, he saw his own face in the reflection on the glass. And just behind his shoulder, for the briefest fraction of a second, was the faint, familiar outline of a tall, gaunt man in a suit. A jolt of pure ice shot through Alex's veins. He flinched violently, almost dropping the painting. "Whoa, you good?" Mark asked, steadying his end. "Yeah, fine," Alex breathed, his heart pounding. "Just slipped." He forced himself to look again. There was nothing there. Just his own pale, shaken reflection. It was a trick of the light, a scar on his psyche, a moment of PTSD. It had to be. They hung the painting on the wall. As Mark stepped back to admire it, Alex leaned in closer, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He tilted his head, examining the surface of the glass where the figure had appeared. And then he saw it. They were almost invisible, a series of incredibly fine parallel lines marring the surface. They weren't on the outside of the glass. He ran his finger over the smooth, cool pane. They were on the inside. They looked exactly like scratches, as if from within the reflection, something had been trying to claw its way out. The man wasn't gone. He was just dormant, trapped, waiting patiently for the next person to ask the question, waiting for the next person to look just a little too long. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.